Hello there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director at Advice Chaser, and I want to welcome you. I want to let you know I am fighting a little bit of a allergy cold, but otherwise I am fine, and we're so glad to have you here. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. There's a great response for this webinar, so we're excited to present this and a couple of items about having maybe your questions heard today. All attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenter will answer those queries during or after the presentation during our question and answer portion of the webinar. If you ask a question in chat box, and with the number of attendees today, we may not be able to get to all of them, go ahead and leave your contact information as well, an email address and a phone number, and we'll be happy to reach out to you after today's event to make sure that question gets addressed. Again, we want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for a clarification or expansion of the material. And again, just put those questions in the chat box, and you do not have to wait till the question and answer period. You can put it in the question in the chat box, and I will collect those for the end. Well, our speaker today is Sean McElderry, who is the CEO and founder of Monarch Wealth and Retirement Strategies. He is a certified financial fiduciary and has over 22 years of experience in the financial services industry. As financial professionals, Sean and his team are committed to helping people create solutions for their retirement assets. Once they understand risk tolerance, time horizon, and goals, they work to develop a program that carefully balances investment strategies with preserving principal. And Sean, I am so excited for this topic today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you to talk about retiring.
Thank you, Marche. Okay, so we're going to just dive in here to basically the concept of retiring during the current downturn. And I think it's really important to, when we talk about this, think about some of the different things that we've been going through over the last few years and what's affecting you financially, but also looking at where there's opportunity in this. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. A lot of people have a hard time really determining when is the best time to retire. And a little bit about me, I've been helping people retire now for 20 plus years. We are a company that's focused on really getting people to understand, what they have, and then helping them design a plan around that to see if they can actually take a jump into that next transition phase. So really retiring now versus later, what are some of the pros and cons, and what are some of the opportunities here? So if we look today where we are in the world, we have a lot of companies that are looking to hire more people. They're also possibly looking to lay off people. So there's a lot of movement around, but we also are at, very low unemployment rates, lower than it's been in some time. So that's something to also consider when you are making these decisions. But let's, kind of shining a light on some of the things that might be important to you is what is the financial perspective for your personal situation. So we have to kind of look at what you're actually doing, what options you have. And a lot of people are not always aware of that or understand them enough. Also, what possibilities are there for you to do a transition? So in other words, would it benefit you to leave your job and go find a different job? Could you actually make a career improvement? Is your health being affected? You know, a lot of people we talk to are just stressed out. They don't like their job anymore. They're not getting, you know, some kind of a sense of you know, purpose from it, and they're looking to make a change. But sometimes they feel like they're stuck because they're not ready to retire and they're afraid of that transition. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, we can go to the next one, Marche. So, you know, during these times, a lot of times what we find is people are forced to do this. And so one of the things I always try to think about as well, if I can actually make decisions before they come to me, think of that kind of train heading your way. If you think layoffs might be coming, well, then get in front of that. Don't wait for the layoff. You want to really be having a conversation with a you know, somebody that's cognizant of your company benefits, or that can help you weed through that and understand, okay, if a layoff happens, or if they make me some kind of an early incentive package that maybe would be by choice, would I actually choose to take it? Because if you wait till they offer it to you, or till that layoff comes, you're not going to have any sense of a roadmap in place. And you know, we deal with a lot of companies that have voluntary reduction plans where the employees are offered, hey, you know, we offered this to you 10 years ago. We're doing it again. We're going to give you, you know, 5 years of paid medical with a bonus layoff, you know, severance, and we're going to add years to your time in service to make you eligible to, you know, to retire sooner than you normally would. Well, if you haven't analyzed that and you think you're going to figure that in the 4 weeks time they typically give you, that can be a very difficult 4 weeks for people to have to decide just on the fly whether they're going to do this. So we find that our clients do much better when they've already been working with an advisor. They have an advisor in place. Maybe they've got a small chunk with somebody that they've been having help them, and they've talked about this, and they know what is or isn't possible going into this. They also start thinking about jobs, you know, of what would they do if they didn't want to just completely retire. The other thing is, in some cases, if you don't take the package, we've seen where companies start to reduce benefits. A good example of that would be, we have many people that work at a couple companies that the medical benefits, if they didn't retire by a certain date, then if they retired after that date, they would no longer have paid retiree medical. And that can be a really big deal. So in other words, let's say they were going to retire at 57, a little bit on the earlier side. This particular company, people tend to retire a little earlier, but they were 55 and they waited and they did not retire when that cutoff date was. Now, if they get laid off at 57, they're without medical till 65 unless they get a job or paid on their own. So it's important to know those risks. If you're looking for a new career opportunity just in general, now could be a good time because employers are looking for people. They want to find somebody that's going to fill that open position possibly. With COVID, they lost a lot of employees. So that's something to look at, is it might be an opportunity to get even a pay increase. So let's talk a little bit about the lump sum. Some of you have annuities from your company, and you're fortunate to have that, where they're going to pay you a monthly chunk when you retire. It could be the state, government. You might be a teacher. You can work at a company where you have that as an option. Some people have the option of also kind of an either or of taking the lump sum. Sometimes people get both. They get a little of each. So whatever plan you have, if you have one, be very fortunate for it, because most companies do not offer these anymore. But if you have the benefit of lump sum, now you have to learn how to maximize it. So the first thing to know is working longer and harder to a point will get you a bigger lump sum. But then as you reach certain ages, once you get eligible and you've knocked out your company's age reduction, that lump sum is going to be affected possibly more by the fact that as you get older, your life expectancy shortens, which means they don't have to give you as much when you walk out the door. And the second thing is, while you're getting older, if interest rates are rising, that will also cause your pension to go down. The last I checked, no one's getting younger. So if you're already retirement eligible, you're going to be aging. So depending on how far you are out on the curve, that can cause your pension to drop slowly, or at least kind of stall out. And then the interest rates are the big one though. And that's really important right now because we just had almost a 2% interest rate increase. The good news is if you're watching this, when this currently happened, you're going to have some time, hopefully, to still leave before this affects your lump sum. It depends on your company, though. These plans have an interest rate that they track, and if that interest rate goes up 1%, that's going to cause your pension to drop by typically about 10%. If it goes up almost 2%, like we've seen, now you're looking at an almost 20% drop. Okay, so for most people having a much larger lump sum than they do a 401k, at least from what we see, if you think the stock market drop was frustrating on your 401k, that lump sum can also be affected. So that's really important to understand that. So you have an opportunity to preserve that right now if you were to get out and the interest rates have not kicked in yet, which they can typically have anywhere between a 5-month look back to a 1-year look back on the rate, or they do it even monthly or quarterly, which is not going to be as good for you. So what that really means is you should be understanding how your plan's interest rates affect that lump sum and figure out what date you'd have to leave by before you're going to get affected. If you take the opportunity to cash that out while you're at an all-time high in your pension on that chunk you have, and you get it out while the stock market and investments are still down, you'd be getting your money out at an all-time high, hopefully, while you get it back into the market while it's still in this cycle of being looking for its bottom. So you're taking your money at a high and not taking that hit from interest rates, and you're investing it at an all-time low. That's a win-win in our eyes. That can really make a big boost for your retirement. Because now you think, well, where am I going to be 5 years out if I followed that methodology? So I think it's, I think kind of one of the biggest messages here is to really kind of take a look at what you have, and look at it, have someone analyze it and take a look at, is there some opportunity right now? So if you think about it, if let's just say you had that $500,000 pension or whatever it is, if you're lucky enough to have that, if you're going to invest it, when would be a good time to do that? Would you want to be taking a $500,000 that pretty much is just handed to you from a company and put it in the market while it's at an all-time high like last January? Or would now be a great time to be putting that in the market while it's at these, pretty much near bottom record numbers that we haven't seen in quite a long time? And so I think that's something to really pay attention to, is if you have the lump sum, is doing an analysis of where you're at right now in your life. But, all of this, you have to have a cash flow analysis run to determine whether this is going to help you or not. So a cash flow analysis, we're going to take all of your assets, whether you have a lump sum, whether you don't. We're going to look at your IRAs, 401ks, and we're going to look at what is going to be a reasonable withdrawal rate. In other words, can you replace your paycheck with a combination of all your assets, including Social Security, and be okay? So that's something that I think is really important to take inventory of. Another thing is we have a lot of people that are moving right now. They're like, you know what, I want to leave the state I'm in. Obviously that happens quite a bit right now in some of the more expensive states like California, where we are. When you're relocating out of state and you're able to seize that value of your house, that's where you might want to have a conversation too about whether it makes sense to pay off the next house or actually get a mortgage. Up until recently, it was definitely a very good case to say, hey, we can take the assets from your house, invest some of them. You could still buy another house somewhere else and go ahead and possibly not pay it off completely, but put a nice down payment and be living maybe a better lifestyle. So moving to another state, downsizing, as possibly you have life changes happening, those are all things to consider, especially when the economy is rough, because, as we know, it's an opportune time to sell your house if you live in certain areas and maybe move somewhere. How long that's going to be the case, we don't know. We don't know if this market in the housing side is going to start dropping. We should see a softening. It already is due to interest rates rising. So the basic idea here is you want to evaluate that. Tax loss harvesting. For those of you that have maybe some significant assets that aren't in an IRA or a 401k. You might have an account somewhere where you've been investing for a while. You might have inherited some money. This could be a time during rough economies to also look at tax loss harvesting, where you're going to take those tax hits or losses by selling specific assets during a down market to offset gains. And so that can save you quite a bit of money. Reverse mortgage, won't get into that too much, but we do talk about that a little bit in terms of if you're of the mind frame that you don't want to sell your house and move out of state, is a reverse mortgage something that can be helpful if you didn't have enough in retirement? That is a strategy to look at. And of course, deleveraging. So if you have debt, now might be a time to look at those credit card bills that maybe those interest rates are going up. So those are all just some kind of timely things to look at during these conditions to get organized. So how does a downturn help me? Well, the first thing is when you talk about like all these big scary words like recession, interest rates going up, inflation, in this case, there's not enough workforce. We have supply chain issues. What really is all of that? And I think it's important to understand, well, how can we take advantage of maybe some of the stuff that's going on? So one thing is if you have too many people wanting to buy something and there's not enough of it, well, if you're in the sales side of things, that might help you. You might be more profitable right now. But if you're on the end of buying it, maybe you should wait for some of those big purchases and just kind of live with things until things calm down. But what we do see is that it tends to balance out everyday costs. So it's going to be kind of a reset on everything. Some things might not come back down all the way. We know that. But it does tend to balance everyday costs out. It also, I think creativity comes from this period of time. If you start really looking around on things you could do to improve your financial situation, I think people tend to get more creative. They start cutting things that maybe are unnecessary. And maybe you could actually think about trying to save more instead of spend more for a period of time, especially as we start to come out of this and maybe some of the things that are affecting you start to improve, such as gas prices, which are finally starting to drop a little bit. Change the way we look at the world around us. Well, when you go through these times, you might start to look at things differently. Like, for example, your house might be a very high value. Maybe it is time to think about downsizing and taking advantage of that. Maybe retiring sooner than you expected, or maybe you just need someone to help you see that it's an opportune time to make a career move. So I think, being aware of what's going on. We just talked to someone recently that, had no intention of retiring for 3 or 4 years. And after about a 10-minute phone call and reviewing what they had, we then met them for an hour or two, and they're leaving in the next week. So, so why did that happen?
Wow.
Well, because
that's
they were
quite
unaware.
A turnaround.
It's quite a turnaround.
Yeah.
Because they were unaware of what was going on with their finances to the point that they had just done what a lot of us Americans do. We put our head down, we grind, and we say, hey, someday I'm going to be able to do this. And sometimes the best of us that have been doing this for so long don't realize how good we've done at this whole process because maybe we've never consulted with somebody. So I think it's really time to get a good, just like you get a health check, you have to have a financial checkup to really see where am I. And if it means you're behind, that's okay. That means we know what we can help you tweak, whether it's adjusting something, saving more. I have another person recently that we helped get into a house that never thought she'd own a house. And it was a really exciting thing for her. And when we explained her how to do it, she's like, I would have never thought of that. I would have never imagined we could have pulled it off. And it was simply because she didn't have all the information. So really, that's where I think, how does a downturn help you? Maybe it woke you up. Maybe it made you a little bit more aware that you have to look at this stuff sooner than later. Last little piece on here, recessions can help lower inflation. Well, we don't want a recession to lower inflation, but I hope with what the government's trying to do is a balancing act. It's like a tightrope of if we raise rates enough, it can help stave off a recession. But likewise, a recession can also stave off that inflation, help bring it down. So they have to kind of do it slowly over time. So they seem to be doing okay, but we have to just keep our eye on that and fingers crossed. So we can go to the next slide, Marche.
Yep.
So, this is kind of a funny one in a way. Prepare your mind and body. Did you experience the COVID-15 or did you actually lose weight? Were you one of those rare people that got out there and took advantage of this? So I think it's mind frame, right? It's how we view circumstances. We're still dealing with this, this virus going around, and I think people are still, weary of certain things. I see it all the time where we live. But, I had a nutritionist that I went to for some time, and the one thing he said was, you have to put yourself first. You have to be unreasonable. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, when everyone else wants to eat what they want to eat, or they want to do this, you have to say, you know what, I have to pull over and grab something else. I've got to be unreasonable about my health. And I think that was an interesting concept, because I think we're too quick to give in to certain things. And, one of the things we really do see is our clients that have taken good care of themselves spend a lot less on healthcare in retirement. So, you can kind of pay it forward to yourself by thinking about that. And, quite frankly, with this economic downturn, a lot of people have been working out of their house, and maybe they have the opportunity to work out more, or whatever it is. But I think, as far as how your finances and health go together, there's been a lot of talk recently about if you're in a toxic job, if you're in a stressful job, if you're in a situation that's not ideal for you, that's going to affect your health down the line, and people tend to not have as long a life expectancy. So that's something also to consider. Is they say that the longer you work up to age 65, so they've done studies on this, for every 2 years you work past 55, it takes 2 years off your life expectancy. So the average life expectancy of a 66-year-old retiree is much shorter than if you had retired and maybe transitioned to another job that was less stressful in some cases. And there's lots of ways to look at that. And you might not be able to afford to, but that's where, again, you have to look at what opportunity is there for you. Okay. And that kind of goes into, our company name is Monarch Wealth. What does wealth mean? Well, it's derived from Old English word wella, meaning well-being. So a lot of times people have this connotation that wealth is a negative thing because they always associate it with money. But we look at it as a holistic way of viewing. Are you aligning your goals, your work-life balance? Are you physically and financially paying attention? Because that all comes into your well-being. So I think that what the biggest thing right now with the current economy is being able to, we can go to the next slide, Marche, is being able to identify and take inventory of where you are and look for those opportunities. And truthfully, sometimes it takes an outside person like myself, or maybe a life coach type person, to look at you and say, hey, here's some things you've done really, really well. Were you aware that you're better off than you thought? And I would say 9 times out of 10, or even more, when we talk to people, they usually sit back in their chair after the meeting and say, wow, I didn't realize that I was in good a position as I am. And so that happens quite frequently, where people kind of just, they hold it in and they're not really realizing it. So that's why when we run a cash flow analysis for you, it's really going to give you a chance to see, can I afford to retire? Does it make sense? And can I take advantage of, maybe moving some assets out of that house or that lump sum into this down market, which we don't know how long it's going to stay here. But if it makes sense to do that, that could be a really good boost to your portfolios as time progresses. And after we do these analyses, you'll see on my bullet points here, sit on a rock. Okay, well, it's kind of a funny thing, but I think there's some truth behind it. Is you've got to get out, take a weekend off with your spouse, and go really think about and talk about what are your long-term goals. Because we don't really stop to think about what we're trying to do. We just keep plugging along and working and doing what we're doing. And so sometimes you have to really evaluate what's important to you. I think COVID has awakened that in a lot of people. Another thing is, be careful who you ask advice from. Okay, we as financial planners hear so much negativity when clients come to us and say, well, yeah, when you had told us all this stuff, Our family was very resistant. My spouse was really resistant. My kids, coworkers, boss, all these people have their own agendas. So I think it's really important to remember that. Talk to a professional about the money side, and then talk to your closest people about what you want to do. But when you go ask a colleague if they think you should retire, do you think they want to watch you get to go home and enjoy that next transition in your life, or are they kind of jealous possibly? So we get a lot of interesting response on that topic. I'd be curious to see what people say. But long story short is have a plan. You wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. And, the saying is fail to plan, plan to fail. This is only the most important last half or third of your life. And I think it warrants a couple hours meeting with a financial planner, maybe an estate planner, and having the conversation about where am I now? And I think that really is the biggest thing. So is there any questions I can answer, Marche?
Absolutely, we do have some questions here. This one is maybe just a nuts and bolts kind of question, but a really good one. You talked about a cash flow analysis. Can you explain what that entails?
So a cash flow analysis is basically where we have probably a 15-minute to half-hour conversation, and we gather up, what do you actually have? How much is in your current 401k? Do you have a lump sum? Do you have an annuity? What does your spouse have? Do you have outside assets, maybe at a bank or an investment of some sort? Do you own a property that has a positive cash flow or otherwise, whatever that is? Do you own or rent? What is your Social Security going to be, which we can guesstimate based on your income, or we can help you run through, the Social Security website, or you could do that ahead of time. So we gather all that, and we basically put it into a plan that we use eMoney, and that's going to give you basically a projection of how you would look from today until whenever we're not here for you. Let's say we could run it to 90, 95 years old. You can tell us what age you like. We usually run it to like 92. And so the idea is that money going to last? Are you going to be able to fund your retirement? It will also give you a really good idea of what your odds of success are. We like it to be in the 95% plus. We want you to be 95% or more chance that this plan is going to go similar to what we showed you. So there's an analysis that's done that will tell you how you come out.
All right. This is a really good question. Someone said, what about paying off the house? That's a kind of goal I would like to achieve, but should I just do it in retirement or before retirement? Talk to me about that.
So that's kind of a long answer, but I'll try to give you the shortest way to put that. That's something that I would definitely talk to an advisor about. The mistake people make, and I think I'll focus on that first, is first of all, when you think about retirement, it's not about having everything paid off and everything in this tidy, perfect place, unless that's a necessity based on your financial situation, which we've seen, okay? And that financial situation would be, hey, I have to pay the house off because I really only am going to have Social Security and maybe a little bit in the 401k, and I'm not going to have much other income. So that house has got to be paid off. But the mistake side of that would be where you have a large, substantial retirement that you've been saving and maybe your company has for you, and you're going to now try to use that money to pay off the house, which those are just not tax efficient ways to do it. The IRS is going to they're going to put your name on a plaque on the wall and say, hey, thank you for sending us all that money out of your IRA to pay off your house, because we just got 50% in taxes between Fed and state typically. If you're taking a sizable chunk, you owe 100 or 200,000 on your house or more, that's going to just knock you out of the park with taxes. So paying off the house, I would just say have a conversation about it. But most of our clients, and many of them, have mortgages throughout their entire retirement. We plan for it. We say, okay, what do you need a month to live? You need $4,350. We can get you at least $4,500, and with cost of living adjustments through the year. So what's the benefit of paying off the house when you hopefully have a good low interest rate and you've been plugging along paying it and you get a tax deduction? All you're doing is paying off an asset that's going to hopefully grow in value regardless of whether you pay it off or not. And a lot of people have been kind of, if you talk to my parents or my grandparents, they would just roll over in their grave, in a sense, if you said, don't pay off the house. They don't understand that. That doesn't mean it's not a good strategy for some people. Okay. And that's, I think, the takeaway here is paying off the house is not always the most important thing.
All right. Here's another question. You talked about people taking perhaps the early layoff offer, because the job market's pretty competitive right now. What about when the job market isn't as competitive? Let's say we're in a different circumstance, the job market slows down. Does it make sense to take that early layoff?
Well, again, that goes back to what the person is trying to achieve. If they are looking to really just transition to a new job, obviously it's better to do when the job market's like this. But I think that if you're going to, if you're concerned that a layoff might be coming down the line, and who knows where the job market might end up being, it would still be beneficial if it aligned with what your goals were. If in other words, your career at that company, you knew was kind of getting to a point where you might want to maximize your benefits. So the way I look at it is, my goal is to help you run out the door by not only, getting every benefit you earn, but by maximizing it. So I can help show you when that kind of high point is in your career. And a lot of people don't understand, and a simple way to think of it is, as you get to a certain age, once you get over typically 55 to 65, depending on your company plan, it will actually start to go backwards on those pension lump sums because your life expectancy is shortening. So we have to really analyze your situation, because sure, if it meant you took a little longer to find a job, or you might want to try to find one ahead of time and have something secured, that might be a way to go too on that.
All right, here's another question. How do I know whether it's a good idea to take my pension versus a lump sum?
So that can vary. What we see in most cases is the benefits and the pros and cons of a lump sum versus annuities. A few things. Most companies, when you get a lump sum, the advantage is an advisor can work with you to set it up in a plan to basically kind of create your own source of income, if you will. The difference is we can allow for cost of living adjustments for raises. Most annuities that you get through your company don't have a cost of living adjustment like Social Security does. So if you're getting $2,300 a month today when you retire, imagine trying to live on that when you're now 20 years out from here. You're going to probably need a lot more. The lump sum tends to have the ability to keep up with those cost of living adjustments, where the annuities, you're really relying just on maybe social at that point to give you the raises. Another thing is if you are retiring and you collect that annuity, if you're married, they're going to penalize you to leave some to your spouse typically. And I say penalize because you have to take a reduced annuity so that if you pass, your spouse still gets either the full amount that you were collecting or some reduced amount. So there's usually a couple choices to pick from on that. And then usually once the spouse dies, that's it. So then the company wins. So if you end up not living till 100 years old, the company gets to keep what would have been that lump sum of yours. So, having done this for 23 years and retiring, plenty of people that have taken that lump sum and are thriving and doing well, there is a strong case to be made for doing that part on your own, with some help and not relying on just the annuity. The other piece of the lump sum would be you have freedom. So the annuity is going to typically pay out right away. So if you were transitioning to another job, that annuity is going to kick in and add to your tax brackets, thus diminishing its value while you're still working. Whereas the lump sum, if you walked out the door at 55 and said, hey, I'm going to go start a 10-year career and retire at 65 somewhere else, you can let that lump sum cook and grow and hopefully do quite well with it. So at 65, that $500,000 is now worth much more. So those are some of the key things on that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for questions. As I'm doing my outro, folks, if you still have some questions that I haven't had a chance to bring up to Sean, go ahead and leave those in the chat. Sean and I will talk after this webinar and make sure that we've addressed those so that we can reach out to you after this event today. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Sean, for your insights. I want to thank the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. And again, to our attendees, look for an email soon with a link to the replay of this event. And you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners is committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.